I rise at maybe there's some discussions happening about amendments actually happening. I would hope in a chamber that has historically been known as the world's most deliberative body that we can actually do that. I find it hard to believe, and it's happened on occasion, that senators who are elected here by entire states actually don't have the opportunity to offer amendments to have them voted on. But here we are, and those are, I guess, are some discussions that are taking place. I do have an amendment, and one that saves $110 million and displaces a position dedicated to algorithmic justice, whatever in the world that is. But I thought it'd be a good opportunity, because algorithmic justice sounds very Orwellian to me, to highlight some of the real abuses that we've seen of free speech in the last few years. I'm 48, so I suppose I'm one of the younger members in the Senate, but I'm also old enough to remember when people of all political stripes, including liberals, actually believed in free speech. That it was something that we believed provided a part of our national identity. What makes America exceptional is that we can tolerate different points of view, agree and disagree, persuade, be willing to be persuaded, that that's a core American value. I think what has happened in the last few years is this debate has somehow gotten off the rails about the willingness of some to actually censor because they disagree, or they think something is threatening, or they might be misinformation. That might well be true, but the government certainly doesn't have a right to tell you what you can hear and what you can say. It just doesn't. It's fundamental. And they also don't get to outsource that censorship to private parties. In my last job, I filed a lawsuit, Missouri versus Biden. And Missouri versus Biden exposed a vast censorship enterprise. It's actually being heard in the United States Supreme Court in about 2 weeks. So we filed the lawsuit. Missouri and Louisiana filed it. And we were actually able to obtain discovery in advance of the preliminary injunction hearing, which was a win. And so the thousands, literally tens of thousands of pages of emails and text messages were exposed. And all I can say is, and if I have the opportunity to use all of my time, I could use, by the way, I would be more than willing to go more than an hour. We'll get to the court's ruling. But I thought it might be worth highlighting, because many members, maybe this will boost C-SPAN viewership, I don't know. But many of the members may have not have heard the allegations, and then ultimately what was proven to the court in their opinion. In 1783, George Washington warned that if the freedom of speech may be taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. That was in George Washington's address to the officers in the Army on March 15th, 1783. I think what I'll do, for the sake of cutting out some of this, is leave the citations out. You'll have to trust me, but it's all on the record, so you can find this. The citations are in fact noted. The freedom of speech in the United States now, this is, by the way, from the second amended complaint that was filed on June of 2022 in the United States District Court for the Western District of Louisiana, the Monroe Division. The freedom of the speech in the United States now faces one of its greatest assaults by federal government officials in our nation's history. A private entity violates the First Amendment if the government coerces or induces it to take action the government itself would not be permitted to do, such as censor expression of lawful viewpoints. The government cannot accomplish through threats of adverse government action what the Constitution prohibits it from doing directly. That is exactly what occurred over the past several years, beginning with express and implied threats from government officials and culminating in the Biden administration's open and explicit censorship programs. Having threatened and cajoled social media platforms for years to censor viewpoints and speakers disfavored by the left, senior government officials in the executive branch have moved into place. Does anybody, Chris, do you find some readers? I mentioned 48, but here we go. The font on this as I print it off is more difficult to read than I would have thought. Moved into a phase of open collusion with social media companies to suppress disfavored speakers, viewpoints, and content on social media platforms under the Orwellian guise of halting so-called disinformation, misinformation, or malinformation. The aggressive censorship that defendants have procured constitute government action for at least 5 reasons. 1, absent federal intervention, common law or statutory doctrines. Thank you. There we go. Statutory doctrines, as well as voluntary conduct and natural free market forces, would have restrained the emergence of censorship and suppression of speech of disfavored speakers, content, and viewpoint on social media. And yet, through Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, the CDA, and other actions, the federal government subsidized, fostered, encouraged, and empowered the creation of a small number of massive social media companies with disproportionate ability to censor and suppress on the basis of speaker, content, and viewpoint. 3, such inducements as Section 230 and other legal benefits, such as the absence of antitrust enforcement, constitute an immensely valuable benefit to social media platforms, an incentive to do the bidding of federal officials. 4, federal officials, including most notably certain defendants herein, have repeatedly and aggressively threatened to remove those legal benefits and impose other adverse consequences on social media platforms if they do not aggressively censor and suppress disfavored speakers, content, and viewpoints on their platforms. And 5, defendants herein, colluding and coordinating with one another, have also directly coordinated and colluded with social media platforms to identify disfavored speakers, viewpoints, and content, and thus have procured the actual censorship and suppression of the freedom of the speech. These factors are both individually and collectively sufficient to establish government action in the censorship and suppression of social media speech, especially given the inherent power imbalance. Not only do government actors here have the power to penalize non-compliant companies, but they have threatened to exercise that authority. So, in this case, government officials, so a lot of these lawsuits about what social media companies were doing were filed against social media companies themselves, removed in the Northern District of California, never to be seen again. What made this lawsuit unique was government actors in their official capacity were sued because of their activity and their censorship by way of social media companies, by threatening investigations, threatening to pull Section 230 protections if they weren't censoring enough, threatening antitrust actions. The complaint continues. As a direct result of these actions, there have been unprecedented rise of censorship and suppression of speech, including core political speech on social media platforms. Many viewpoints and speakers have been unlawfully and unconstitutionally silenced in the modern public square. These actions gravely threaten the fundamental right of free speech and free discourse for virtually all citizens in Missouri, Louisiana, and America, both on social media and elsewhere. And they have directly impacted individual plaintiffs in this case, all of whom have been censored and or shadow banned as a direct result of defendants' actions. Under the First Amendment, the federal government should play no role in policing private speech or picking winners and losers in the marketplace of ideas. But that is what federal officials are doing on a massive scale, the full scope and impact of which has yet to be determined. Secretary Mayorkas of DHS commented that the federal government's effort to police private speech on social media are occurring, quote, across the federal enterprise. It turns out that this statement is quite literally true. This case involves a massive, sprawling federal censorship enterprise, which includes dozens of federal officials across at least 11 federal agencies, components, who communicate with social media platforms about misinformation, disinformation, and the suppression of private speech on social media, all with the intent and effect of pressuring social media platforms to censor and suppress private speech that federal officials disfavor. Moving to the general allegations. A, freedom of speech is the bedrock of American liberty. The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution states that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, etc. Article 1, Section 8 of the Missouri Constitution provides something similar. I won't read the whole paragraph. The freedom of speech and expression guaranteed by the First Amendment is one of the greatest bulwarks of our liberty. These rights are fundamental and must be protected against government interference. If the President or the Congress enacted a law or issued an order requiring the suppression of certain disfavored viewpoints or speakers on social media, or directing social media to demonetize, shadow ban, or expel certain disfavored speakers, such a law or order would be manifestly unconstitutional under the First Amendment. Quote, if there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion. That was in the West Virginia State Board of Education v. Barnett. In another case, the First Amendment was noted as, and I quote, the First Amendment means the government has no power to restrict expression because of its message, its ideas, its subject matter, or its content. That's in Ashcroft v. ACLU. Quote, in light of the substantial and expansive threats to free speech posed by content-based restrictions, the Supreme Court has rejected a startling and dangerous, a free-floating test for First Amendment coverage based on an ad hoc balancing of relative social costs and benefits, U.S. v. Alvarez. Section 2 of the general allegations, merely labeling speech misinformation or disinformation does not strip away First Amendment protections. Labeling disfavored speech, misinformation, or disinformation does not strip it of First Amendment protection. Absent from those few categories where the law allows content-based regulation of speech in any general exception of the First Amendment for false statements, this comports with the common understanding that some false statements are inevitable if there is to be open and vigorous expression of views in public and private conversation, expression the First Amendment seeks to guarantee. The First Amendment has thus rejected the argument that, quote, false statements as a general rule are beyond constitutional protection. Quote, permitting the government to decree this speech to be a criminal offense, whether shouted from the rooftops or made in a barely audible whisper, would endorse government authority to compile a list of subjects about which false statements are punishable. That government power has no clear limiting principle. Our constitutional tradition stands against the idea that we need Oceana's ministry of truth. That's cited for the previous case as well, and also citing, by the way, 1984 by George Orwell. We, the court, hold, in that same case, we, the court, hold that the interest in truthful discourse alone is sufficient to sustain a ban on speech. It would give government a broad censorial power unprecedented in this court's cases or in our constitutional tradition. The mere potential for the exercise of that power casts a chill the First Amendment cannot permit if free speech, thought, and discourse are to remain a foundation of our freedom. Section 3, counter speech, not censorship, is the proper response to, quote, misinformation, end quote. When the government believes that speech is false and harmful, counter speech, not censorship, must suffice to achieve its interest. The First Amendment presumes that the dynamics of free speech, of counter speech, or refutation can overcome the lie. The remedies for speech that is false, the remedy for speech that is false is speech that is true. This is the ordinary course in a free society. The response to unreasoned is the rational, to the uninformed, the enlightened, to the straight-out lie, the simple truth. The theory of our Constitution is that the best test for truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market. It's in the same case, also quoting the Abrams v. U.S. case from 1919. The First Amendment itself ensures the right to respond to speech we do not like, and for a good reason. Freedom of speech and thought flows not from the beneficence of the state, but from the inalienable rights of the person. And suppression of speech by the government can make exposure to falsity more difficult, not less so. Society has the right and the civic duty to engage in open, dynamic, rational discourse. These ends are not well served when the government seeks to orchestrate public discussion through content-based mandates. Section 4, Americans have the First Amendment right to be exposed to a free flow of speech, viewpoints, and content free from censorship by government officials. The First Amendment also protects the right to receive others' thoughts, messages, and viewpoints freely in a free flow of public discourse. When a speaker exists, the protection afforded is to the communication, to its source, and to its recipients both. That's the Virginia State Board of Pharmacy v. Virginia Citizens Consumer Council from 1976. The right to receive information is an inherent corollary of the rights to free speech and press that are explicitly guaranteed by the Constitution, because the right to receive ideas follows from the sender's First Amendment right to send them. The dissemination of ideas can accomplish nothing if otherwise willing addresses are not free to receive and consider them. It would be a barren marketplace of ideas that had only sellers and no buyers. Lamont v. Postmaster General. Quote, a fundamental principle of the First Amendment is that all persons have access to places where they can speak and listen, and then after reflection, speak and listen once more. Packingham v. North Carolina. Assuring that the public has access to a multiplicity of information sources is a government purpose of the highest order, for it promotes values central to the First Amendment. Turner v. Broadcasting System. I'm going to skip a little bit here. Section 5, government officials may not circumvent the First Amendment by inducing, threatening, or colluding with private entities to suppress protected speech. It is axiomatic that the government may not induce, encourage, or promote private persons to accomplish what it constitutionally is forbidden to accomplish. Norwood v. Harrison. A private entity violates the First Amendment if the government coerces or induces it to take action the government itself would not be permitted to do, such as censor expression of lawful viewpoint. Knight First Amendment Institute. The government cannot accomplish through threat of adverse government action what the government prohibits it from doing directly. Threats of adverse regulatory or legislative action to induce private actors to censor third-party speech violate the First Amendment. See Hammerhead. Where comments of a government official can reasonably be interpreted to intimating that some form of punishment or adverse regulatory action will follow the failure to assent to the official's request, a valid claim can be stated. I'm going to save you all the citations from that. The unprecedented control over private speech exercised by social media companies give government officials an unprecedented opportunity to circumvent the First Amendment and achieve indirect censorship of private speech. By virtue of its ownership of the essential pathway, a social media platform can silence the voice of competing speakers with a mere flick of a switch. Turner. The potential for abuse of the private power over a central avenue of the communication cannot be overlooked. Part B, the dominance of social media platforms as a forum for public information and discourse. Social media companies have become, in many ways, the modern public square. Packingham. Social media platforms provide perhaps the most powerful mechanisms available to a private citizen to make his or her voice heard. Today's digital platforms provide avenues for historically unprecedented amounts of speech, including speech by government actors. Also unprecedented, however, is the concentrated tool. I do want to just end with this. By the way, you can follow that online. You can also listen to the Supreme Court arguments in 2 weeks. I'll submit the rest of the speech, and I'll just close with this. This case that's being argued, and as we talk about these issues, I would hope that, as a body we could come together to allow individual senators to offer amendments. I would hope that over time that we can also find common ground on this idea that the government shouldn't have any business suppressing speech. And the temptation to control so-called misinformation is great. And this case stands for the proposition you cannot outsource that to social media companies. It's an Orwellian scheme that played out among a whole host of government agencies and bureaucracies that I hope that case, which I think is the most important free speech case in the history of our country, spells out very clearly. And with that, Mr. President, I will yield back my time.